Excellent. Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful presentation. Next up, we have Anthony Vaccaro, the president of the Northern Miner, a great advocate for the mining industry, both nationally and internationally. So everyone, please give a round of applause for Anthony Vaccaro.
Thanks, everyone. My wife always tells me how loud my voice is, so I don't know, you might have to adjust a little bit after Paul's excellent presentation at the normal level that humans speak at. I tend to go a little bit higher than that. Okay, that is the perfect segue. Thank you, Paul, because what I am going to talk about, I couldn't think of a better setup than what Paul just conversed to you all about to go after someone from the ministry. Let me set it up this way. Privilege of my position is I do get to meet with many of the leaders of our industry around the world, global leaders. And I'd say that, a good section of them, when the subject of the role of government in critical minerals comes up, a good section of them says the best thing government can do is get out of the way. Get out of the way and let us do our thing. Well, this presentation is about how that is no longer a realistic notion, nor should it be in the current climate that we are going to be in. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is looking at our industry through the lens of what's going on in the world, through geopolitics. Then we're going to bring it down into Canada. Then we're going to bring it down into Newfoundland and Labrador. Because I think this will be the most defining factor in investing and in how we take metals out of the ground for the next many, many decades. And it's going to be very imperative that we all have a good understanding of it, which I'm sure a lot of us in this room do, but I hope to provide a little more data and a little more thought-provoking things around it. So what we're going to start with, the opening lens on the geopolitics, what you're seeing there, if you're wondering what the hell is going on with that. The idea is that what we're seeing is a world that's increasingly being broken into these, what some people call spheres of influence, but I think that's a euphemism. What they really are spheres of control. So there's a Russian sphere, which is obviously JV'd in some ways with the Chinese sphere, but there's also tacit agreements between the two. And then there's the Americans. And what they're trying to do, and what they want to do, is to create geopolitical spheres that are bigger than just their own countries and have very strong control over trade and critical mineral production within those spheres. Now, in their dream world, it would be USA, Russia, and China. But of course, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, South Korea, Japan, why would we go along with that? We have the populations and the economies where we don't have to. And the federal election just spoke to the fact that we're not kosher with that. So that is the coalition of the willing, which is already getting out there, and I think it's very clever branding by Western Europe, Canada, Australia, South Korea, and Japan. The idea that a coalition of countries that choose their own destiny instead of the mindset of a Russia or China and under Trump America where it's you will do our willing, our bidding. So those are the spheres, and now we're going to use these spheres to look at. So if we accept that these spheres are going to be defining geopolitics over the next many decades, well, what spheres have the most critical minerals? So what we've done, we've been working on for months on this actually. Our first one was on copper extraction. So we look at, okay, where is copper being pulled out? If you look at these spheres, what sphere has the edge in terms of copper? And we're going to first look at extraction, then we're going to go into refining. And when you do that, U.S. looks pretty good actually, right? Largely because of South America, Peru, Chile being the most predominant ones. Roughly 50% of the copper being extracted in the world right now would fall into what we would consider to be the U.S. sphere. You can see on this map, the green would be the coalition of the willing, okay? And the red, China. Now, what's really interesting about copper extraction is that China would have recognized early on that they're not sitting on top of enough copper. Hence, Belt and Road initiatives. Hence, their incredible investments in Africa over the last 20 years. So we've given Congo and Zambia to the Chinese sphere. Right? There's conjecture in this, unquestionably. But we researched deeply, looking at economic, cultural ties, looking at the way the population views these different countries. And unfortunately, China has made stronger inroads in Africa than the U.S. has. So those would fall there, and that allows China to get to about 30% of copper extraction, but that's the product of a lot of foresight on the part of the Chinese government and a lot of work being done in that part of the world. We move to copper processing, now it flips, right? So now the States falls to about 15%. Coalition of the willing actually jumps up, above the States. this was done, the monopoly pieces. I was working with the creative designer on this, and he originally had the coalition of the willing one over in Europe. I said, no, put it in Canada. On the off chance that this comes across Trump's desk, that'll really piss him off to see a bigger monopoly piece on top of Canada. And they do follow. I will say we did an event down in Washington, D.C. last year, and the White House, the economic advisor to Joe Biden, it was before the election, so Biden was still in power, actually reached out and realized that we were doing this. So I thought, what an odd thing. These are the times that we're living in. The president of the Northern Miner getting a call from the White House about a show that we're doing down in Washington, D.C. He wanted to participate. 10 White House people in the White House came to the show in Washington, D.C. to learn about critical minerals. Just to let you all know how this is tracking. They're aware of what we're doing. I don't know if Trump's going to see this, but if he does, I hope he does. We're not going along willingly with their version of the world. What's interesting here as well, so refinement goes to China. 53% of the world's copper refinement is coming out of China. But you'd rather be sitting on top of the copper, right, than the refining. You can build up refining capacity. Of course, in North America, we've been a bit sleepy on this. We haven't built up the refining capacity the way China has. I have a slide that shows the amount of refineries that we have in Canada. Estimates are China has over 60. Canada has about 9, not counting aluminum, just for copper I'm speaking of here, copper, nickel. So we have a ways to go, but with government help, that's where this piece comes in, right? There's going to have to be a government piece in this to get the capital flowing to correct this. But this should be setting up a warning flag to everyone that as the world gets kind of sectioned off this way, it's a wake-up call, right? Rare earths, everyone's reading about rare earths these days. I know so our group, mining, the Northern Miner Group, we have the Northern Miner. We also have mining.com. We have Canadian Mining Journal. Mining.com is our big international web traffic. We've got 1 million users there a month. So that's where we really can take the pulse of the industry. And rare earth stories are tracking way stronger than anything else. This is a super important topic right now because of China's stranglehold and what the West is trying to do to catch up. This one just looks at resources in the ground. We're not even looking at refinement. We're going to be doing that in the coming weeks. And when we get to refinement, China goes to like 90%. But even resources in the ground, China is at 53%, right? So a bit worrisome, and why it's so important, again, that we in Canada and in the West in general get our act together, work closely with government, and get this straight and get the necessary investment dollars so that we can shape the world the way we want to shape it a little bit, or at least have a voice in it. Now let's drill down a little bit into Canada. Canada's copper industry, a bit of a disturbing trend there. You can see our global share actually declining from almost 3% down to about 2%. What's concerning as well with when you look at the data this way is that number at the bottom. So when you have your share of global production is much higher than your share of global reserves, that can be now there's a lot of mitigating factors, but it can be an indicator of continued decline in terms of production if you're not replacing it with the reserves. Again, speaking to the fact of the need of investment in copper, so I think Firefly's project here in Bay Verte speaks to that. Provincial breakdown. What's great about this, when you look at the provincial breakdown, we're going to do it for copper, nickel, and iron ore, is you see that Newfoundland, Labrador is a player. Everyone knows for iron ore. But Voisey's Bay, keeps it in the conversation as well. And what we're seeing with this conference here today is these next projects coming along. Traditionally, you think of Labrador, but of course, Central Newfoundland is going to be a key player in all of this. BC and Ontario, currently the big players in copper because of Sudbury in Ontario. Similar story with nickel, but you see Newfoundland, Labrador. Just for brevity here, we just put Newfoundland just to try to make it all fit on the chart there, but it's Newfoundland, Labrador, of course. And then iron ore, Newfoundland, Labrador, second to Quebec. So Newfoundland, Labrador, a key player already, but so much potential, and the time is right to really start ramping things up. Let's dive into a little bit more on critical minerals. This is just a very handy summation of what are critical minerals. I've gathered what is in common between US and Canada, because every country has their own list of critical minerals, but those are in common. Antimony, fluorspar, let's remember those as we go through the presentation. Potash and uranium in Canada, not on the US. So then when we flip to where Canada ranks in terms of critical minerals, you'll see, we're number 1 in potash, but potash isn't even on the American critical minerals list. Here's what I was speaking of with the smelters. What's not on here is Long Harbor. Here in Newfoundland Valley is Long Harbor. Hydromet. It's because it's Hydromet. We pulled the data here just on smelters. Technically, I think Hydromet isn't classified as a smelter, but something for Newfoundland to be proud of, right? This is one of the most state-of-the-art processing facilities, and kind of points the way to the future to how nickel, cobalt, and copper are going to be processed. So that's a shining beacon, I think, that again speaks to how North America can get these things right with less environmental damage, because in China they're building smelters, they don't give a damn about the environmental damage. They'll say they do, but in actuality, of course, they don't. So things like Long Harbor are a really good example of the continued investment that we need in that direction. Okay, in terms of what are we talking about in terms of money available from governments, right? Most of the serious players here have announced critical mineral funding. The States is way out ahead. This is IRA, this is largely from Biden. Of course, President Trump's come in and said, you know, anything that Biden did is obviously terrible and heresy and the work of the devil. But he hasn't really done a lot to repeal this. A lot of it was already in motion. So he's going to add on top of it, it looks like, and he's already made some announcements that way. But those are real numbers, and a lot of that money is already starting to flow through the system. Saudi Arabia, the second biggest player, they obviously have deep pockets from oil, and they realize oil isn't forever, so they're repositioning, become a very serious player. China, even though China has this big lead, especially with rare earths, and although their numbers, we can never really fully trust numbers coming out of China because muddy waters catches more fish is the expression they use in China. Still 80 billion, that's officially what they're saying. It's likely far, far more, and they have a lead. EU's getting serious about it, about 45 billion. Canada, something, you know, around 4 billion, more than UK, and UK's GDP is about a third bigger than Canada's. So significant in that way, but more can be done, right? I think we will see more. I think I put this chart up here to indicate that I think we're going to see, when you see that pressure coming from Saudi Arabia, EU, China, the pressure is going to be on the Canadian federal government to spend more, not less on this. So there's going to be more funds available. We do have a really great agreement with the Americans, the U.S.-Canada joint venture on critical minerals. This is continuing through with Trump. I think it's a good template. We'll probably see more. Could we do something similar with Australia, with Western Europe, with that coalition of the willing, right? I think you're going to see more of these agreements within that coalition. And money's already flowing into Canada. I've highlighted 4 projects here that have all received American money along with Canadian money through this joint venture. These are Canadian assets receiving American money. The mechanism of that is through the DoD, right? So the Americans can release funding through the Department of Defense for national security. They can't do it through the DOE, Department of Energy, which has a ton of money, but that money has to stay within the States. But through the DoD, Canadian projects, Canadian companies can access financing, American financing through the DoD. Some of that IRA, almost $400 billion. All right, let's get back to Newfoundland, Labrador. Paul did a great job outlining the importance of the sector. I mean, it's $4.3 billion. Contribution to GDP, it's roughly 10%. 8 operating mines, that's going to be growing. Growing mineral exporting, up 11% since 2018. Almost 10,000 people employed. Just speaking to the fact that mining is already so important to this province, and the growth potential is fantastic. Paul had this slide up as well. I didn't know that you had it. I wouldn't repeat it, but it's a great slide. Really kind of summarizes all the key points. And this presentation will be available for anyone, so this is a really good one to stay on top of what is happening. Paul also touched upon the big development projects in gold. I'm also going to hit fluorspar because it is on the critical minerals list, and St. Lawrence is going to be coming into production, so that's going to be a significant one as well. With each project that comes onto development, it also sends a very strong signal internationally, right? Valentine especially now with Equinox and the Calibre merger, a lot of eyeballs on that. Hammerdown's going to be interesting as well. You know, Franco-Nevada being invested in here, Eric Sprott with Newfound Gold. So the eyes are on there, and yeah, getting it right is going to be super important, and people are watching. We've already had gold bars coming out of Valentine, right? So very, very exciting time. Now, I do want to spend the final bit of time here on antimony, because I think it's a really interesting story. Antimony's become a hot mineral in the last couple of years. People didn't talk about it 3 years ago. Now people are talking about it. It has implications for Newfoundland, Labrador. Its uses, right? It's really, the military one is why people are talking about it. It's a key metal that's used in the military industry, even for like infrared night vision goggles, but also for actual artillery. So it's important, it's increasingly important, and China, lo and behold, surprise, surprise, China dominates. What are we going to do in the West? It's an important mineral. We need it. We need to make sure our military is strong, but China is absolutely dominating it. Prices have been surging on antimony, and the Americans have woken up to it. Perpetua Resources has been a big story in the mining industry. Stocks up to like $20. I remember when it was a couple of bucks just a couple of years ago. It's already received $70 million from the DoD and financing of $1.8 billion from the American Export-Import Bank. That shows, proving the point here that I started with, how serious governments are about putting real dollars into these projects. Perpetua never would have been able to build a mine here 5 or 10 years ago, right? It's this federal funding, so critical, and the story with Perpetua is around antimony. That is what the U.S. government is looking to secure. Well, lo and behold, Newfoundland and Labrador has the biggest antimony potential mine. It's on care and maintenance right now in all of North America, okay, with 88,000 contained tons. It's Beaverbrook, and well, we wrote about it in 2004, and I'll read the quote from the Northern Miner. At full production, Beaverbrook would produce about 5% of the world's antimony and rank as North America's only primary antimony mine. Significant asset, and here's where the plot thickens. Who owns it? Why isn't it in production? The Chinese own it. So go back to the beginning of the presentation. We're talking about spheres of control. We have this critical asset that's Canadian, on care and maintenance by the Chinese. I will tell you, there's rumors that the Chinese use this to that Beaverbrook is on care and maintenance, but if the price of antimony stays high and other projects come on, they can turn the tap on, flood the market a little bit, drive the price back down, discourage others from entering. There's rumors that that's one of the games they're playing. There's certainly nothing stopping them currently from doing that. So I think this is going to be a very interesting asset to look at as possibly a microcosm for what's going on that big geopolitical scale. Does it stay in Chinese hands? Because we saw in 2022, the Canadian government came in and forced the divestiture for 3 companies, forced the Chinese to divest in them. Each one of those 3 companies was not too happy. All of a sudden, you don't have investment from a major shareholder that's being forced out. And they turned to the government and said, okay, you're forcing the Chinese out, good. Are you coming in? And the government said, nah. So a bit problematic how that was done. I think that's why the government is going to think more carefully about how they do this. The theme is set, geopolitical spheres. How do we in North America, how does the coalition of the willing make sure that we're staying as strong as we can, and what are the next strategic steps to do it? I would keep everyone's eyes on Beaverbrook. I think that might be a bit of a case study going forward to how this plays out. Okay, I'm over time. Hope that was at least thought-provoking for you all. If anyone does have any quick questions, I'm here, or I can be found. I'm here for the day. Okay? Thanks very much, everyone.